Hey, what's up everyone? My name's Walter, and today it's time to get excited because I'm back here with another story about a neckbeard. Neckbeards are gentlemanly figures who are interested in the finer things in life, like anime, video games, and Mountain Dew. They're known for growing questionable facial hair, though this quality isn't required because it's the beard on the inside that counts. Let's get started with Neckbeard story from Reddit. I'm just going to start with this story. I might add posts at the end, we'll see. This is probably the craziest story we've had since Iowa Beard. And you'll probably find yourself cringing a lot, so there's your warning. A neckbeard stalked my mother and tried to assault my friend. Long post warning, but hopefully it's an interesting read. This happened over a number of years, starting about 15 years ago, and I didn't find out about many of these events until after everything was over. I've also used pseudonyms for all involved. When I was in high school, my best friend at the time was, I now realize, a neckbeard. Let's call him Sean. Sean had pretty much all the diagnostic features. He collected and played tabletop Warhammer, both fantasy and 40k. Watched anime, played video games, and Magic the Gathering. Was a bit tubby and usually had some literal neck stubble. He came to my house all the time to play video games / Magic, both of which I was into at the time as well, and in the process also became good friends with my mother. At the time, he also liked one of the girls at school. Now that I think of it, one of the very few Asians at the school. But she didn't like him back, and when he got rejected, he didn't take it well. He talked to my mother about it, and she tried to comfort him and unwittingly became his emotional rebound. I had no idea of his infatuation with her at the time, and nor did she for that matter. This is where things started to get weirder. Sometimes after school, Sean would just turn up at my house, or I would get home and find he'd gotten there a few minutes earlier and would be talking to my mom. I'm a pretty casual sort of guy, so I didn't mind. I thought all three of us were on very good terms, and it would sometimes be a good opportunity to hang out, though he did sometimes act a bit strange towards me. Now Sean, my mom, let's call her Carol, and I all played table tennis at a local club. Carol, who had been single for a long time, would often talk with one of the guys at table tennis. Let's call him Paul, someone much closer to her own age. It was an entirely platonic relationship at the time, but still more than Sean could bear. He started to get weirder. I moved to the city to start uni, leaving my mom and younger brother in the house. Sean never called me, though I tried to call once a week in what turned out to be a losing battle to keep the friendship alive. We started to drift apart, but in hindsight, I think it wasn't just the distance that caused this. The main factor was probably his feelings for my mother. One evening, Sean must have sneakily approached the house. Not an easy feat, as it's on a big, quiet country block and the driveway is very long, meaning you can easily see / hear any approaching car, so he must have parked some distance away and walked, probably while it was dark. Mom gets a text saying to check the back door, where she finds a very cutesy-looking, big-eyed plush puppy toy. She didn't know what to think of it at the time. I think she was more confused than anything, and I only found out much later that this had even happened. What was going through Sean's mind, I cannot imagine. Maybe everything is going according to the plan. Step 1, become friends. Step 2, deliver plush toy. Step 3, this woman, 21 years my senior and mother of my best friend, falls hopelessly in love with me. I understand this will make things awkward with her own son, but oh well. Jesus, so this is ridiculous because he's hitting on his best friend's mom, of course? But even if we forgot about that for a second here somehow, what was he thinking? This is someone he was on pretty good terms with that he could presumably talk to, and instead he decides to pull this ultra creepy move where he sneaks over in the dead of night and leaves something there as if to let her know he can do it again. This would creep out most women. And he's not going to get any less stalkerish as the story goes on. After the toy puppy seemed to have no effect, things took a creepier / darker turn. Sean started to occasionally drive past the house, or park at the end of the very long driveway and watch the house. From this distance he couldn't see any detail, but could still see if people were home or moving about outside. If someone started to walk down the driveway to approach him, he would drive off. Sometimes during these surveillance missions, he would encounter a snag. Paul would be visiting for a bit of table tennis practice or a beer and chat. Then the nasty texts from Sean to my mom start. Sean, I know you're in there with him. Mom, no response. Sean, slut. If the puppy wasn't a clear sign to Carol that he was interested in her that way, and it probably wasn't, she must now have known. Then he starts sending her articles from goodness knows what website about how relationships between older women and younger men can work and are really healthy. Wow, that's like Lucas Werner's move but reversed. He's all about sending articles about older men and younger women, of course. Then the random phone calls started, often at odd hours of the night. He would call the home phone, and when Carol answered, there would be no response, or just breathing. After a few hellos, Mum would hang up, and when it happened a couple of times, she reverse dialed and found it was coming from Sean's home number. It finally ended when Carol threatened to call the police. Goodness knows what might have happened otherwise, though Sean's subsequent behavior isn't encouraging. This wasn't the last I was to see of him. About 2 or 3 years after that, he started uni too, and boarded at the same place I was staying. A boarding house with about 100 people. We weren't particularly close, and I don't know if he even knew that I was aware of the stalking, but we bumped into each other from time to time. I never confronted him about the stalking, which in hindsight I probably should have, but it probably had something to do with the fact that I didn't see him for a long time after the actual events. And the intervening years had a kind of dampening effect. It felt more like an awkward memory than a recent grievance. But I wasn't to learn until later all the events that would transpire at the boarding house. Jump forward a few years again. I started dating a nice girl, and on one of our adventures we dropped in to say hi at a table tennis tournament where some of my friends and family were playing. And Sean was there. He'd gained weight. A lot. He said something about my girlfriend and I being very happy together, in which he probably meant to choose the right courteous words, but he couldn't help spitting them out with a palpable bitterness. When I did learn about the events of the boarding house, it was some years later, and a group of my friends were all hanging out, including one we'll call Jemima, who was also at the same boarding house during uni. I noticed Sean had befriended her during this time and was often in her room to help out with one or another uni project. Well, it turns out that uni collaboration was not the end of it. One evening, Jemima gets a text from Sean saying to walk out to the middle of the communal lawns. She does and finds a bouquet of flowers. Now at this stage, I think Sean hadn't shown any romantic signs toward Jemima and had just been casual friends, so she was pretty confused by the sudden romantic gesture. She hesitates. Then she gets another text. Why aren't you taking them? Jemima looks around but sees no one, so Sean is obviously hiding somewhere out of sight but is still able to watch her. I don't know how you can not realize how creepy that is, but he apparently managed to miss it. Then one fateful evening, while hanging out with Jemima, Sean mentioned something about their relationship. She was like, "Our what? When did this happen?" Sean was evidently subscribing to what I'll call the Pokemon theory of relationships. Once you gain enough niceness points, your friendship levels up and evolves into a relationship. Apologies to Pokemon and everyone who plays it. I love the games but couldn't think of a better metaphor than this for the way neckbeards think relationships work. Unfortunately for Sean, real relationships do not know or obey the Pokemon theory, and when he was rejected, he became physical. He pinned Jemima to the bed and started telling her about all the things a man can do to a woman, sexually, which he'd apparently learned from the internet, read porn. He evidently thought this would be a good idea because she would hear all this and go, "Wow, this guy knows his stuff, and it sounds like a lot of fun." As you can imagine, his speech had exactly the opposite effect. She screamed. Thankfully, in a building with 100 people and everyone's dorm rooms wall to wall with each other, this was easy to hear and is probably what saved her. He quickly fled the room, and what I can only imagine would otherwise have turned into a sexual assault, or worse, was thus averted. It is so weird to me that this guy can act like a normal person most of the time, presumably. Because he can make friends with women, but it just falls apart when he tries to hit on them. Because he can't seem to do anything not in the creepiest way possible. It's now been a few years since I've seen or heard anything to do with Sean. Occasionally I think of him and it really troubles me that he's on the loose, assuming that he is. He's a disgrace to men, and much more importantly, a danger to women. Now that I've written all this out, it seems pretty dramatic, but all of this unfolded gradually over a number of years, making it harder to see in action. Like the frog who sits in the pot of water while it's gradually heated until the frog cooks, predatory neckbeardism took over Sean like some kind of gradually creeping disease until the transformation was complete. I wish I'd been able to stop it before it got that far. Guys, confront the Seans of your life. You can do better than I managed, I'm sure. Not that girls can't or shouldn't confront neckbeards, but I think they will be more likely to listen to other guys, that's all. Since they're pretty efficient at dismissing any girl's opinion they don't like. Oh, you don't like me stalking you? Feminism is cancer. And girls, I'm sorry. I don't know if I could have stopped Sean from becoming this way, but in hindsight I could have tried harder, if I'd had a bit more courage, a bit better social understanding, or even an inkling of where this might have led. I didn't realize at the time that the problems were so much bigger than just a failing friendship. I'm not sure why he didn't talk to me at the time, but maybe it's just because we didn't tend to discuss relationships, girls, or even feelings very much in our friendship. I wouldn't have refused to talk about them or anything, though I never brought them up, and if anything I knew even less about them than he did at the time, so maybe that's the reason. Then again, I don't think it can be the only reason. I think it's a bit like when you don't catch someone's name at a party, but you keep a conversation going for a while. The longer it goes, the more awkward it is to finally admit it and ask for their name. When some guys have a friendship that's gone on for years without ever discussing the touchy-feely things, it's like some invisible barrier forms over time that makes it harder and harder to finally bring it up now, after all this time. There's probably a lesson here about toxic masculinity. Not that we were at all the locker room talk type of guys, pretty much the opposite really, but still, toxic masculinity comes in many flavors, and we both could have benefited a lot from something like Reddit Men's Lib. I do like how he said this guy is a disgrace to men. People have often accused me of pandering to women. Hell, they've accused me of running this channel to hit on women. And no, that would be a terrible idea. I was hoping that I could stop some of these guys from looking like clowns out there. Because it doesn't really make the rest of men look better when they're doing this. I'm not saying don't threaten guys like this either. I'd have to if someone was bugging my mom. I'm mostly just proud of myself that I got through this whole thing without saying OP's mom has got it going on. Fuck, well I almost got through it. Anyway, that's about all the time I have for you today. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you have something to say about this very cringy Neckbeard story and the characters in it, let me hear it in the comments. Reading the comments is the second best part of releasing a video. You know, after the money. If you're new here and want more content like this, I would suggest subscribing because there's going to be a lot more in the near future. Okay, now it's finally time to shout out my generous patrons. Forgive me if I screw this up, Patreon changes their site all the time and I'm pretty much an old man on the internet by this point. Levon, Chris Sturman, Invader Jill, Cody Smith, Amanda Gillies, Shay Parker, Cho, Chocobo Asylum, Elvis Needs Boats Bennett, Hunter Malcolm, Justin Godsey, Luis Orozco, MDB 3000, Spoonie the Rogue, V stands for, Jacob K, Camper Supreme, Knit1 Code 2, Roy, Lil Spoon, Esperova, Ms. Mayhem, Regrettable Stitches, Shifter Brands, and Jubes. Thank you all so much, it really helps me out. All my videos have been waiting on reviews this week because I don't like waiting to release them. Let me know if you liked the video though. I might have some more Neckbeard stories to cover, but we're probably going back to dating hell soon. That's always fun. Have a great day, everyone. And don't hide in the shadows when you're trying to hit on women.